right. Hi, everyone. This is Sarjeet. You may be watching this in the Business Analyst and Scrum Master in Demand Facebook group or YouTube channel. I'm a little under the weather today, so please excuse my voice. I wanted to get this content out to you because there's been many questions. Last week or the week before, I covered business analyst documentation. What are the different types of documentation that business analysts are responsible for within the different phases? And this week, I will cover for you guys the different documentation that is needed in the Agile environment. So just bear with me and I will share my screen and go over some of the required documentation that we have for Agile projects. Lots of people think that because we're in the Agile environment, that there's not a whole lot of documentation. There is documentation involved in Agile projects as well. It's mostly just in-time documentation to make sure that there's not a big, heavy workload in as we see in the waterfall in the planning phase or in the requirements phase. So the key difference is that in a waterfall scenario, we will see a lot of documentation being done upfront in the analysis phase, and then in the Agile environment, we continue and go through and work on documentation as we're in that particular, based on the prioritization of that function or feature. So give me 1 second and I'll share my screen and then we will go through Agile documentation. So generally, as you know, Agile in itself is very iterative, right? So we generally have a product backlog of requirements. We generally have, from our product backlog, things that are highly prioritized go into the sprint backlog. From the sprint backlog are the ones that, like the key user stories that we complete in 2 to 4 week sprints, as depending on how your organization has them. So if they have 2-week sprints, things in the sprint backlog will be completed in 2 weeks. If you have a 4-week sprint, things in the product in the sprint backlog will be completed in the 4 weeks. And then as we complete those user stories in a given sprint, we then go back, look at the product backlog, pick up our high priority user stories, place them in the sprint backlog, and the process continues, right? But lots of times, in order for us to be ready to take things into the sprint backlog, your user stories have to be ready. They have to be ready to be, taking into the sprint backlog to make sure that when we take something in, our developers have enough information and knowledge about the user story in terms of documentation, so they understand what needs to happen as a result of that user story. So generally, this is a process that we follow. We have a product backlog, and then stakeholders. So we have a product backlog that we have detailed user stories plus acceptance criteria. We have prototypes. We add them to the sprint. Development begins, and then testing. So this is a cycle that kind of repeats itself. But before we go there, I want to focus more on the documentation that we see in the Agile environment, right? So generally, we first, as I mentioned, even last week for waterfall, we always begin with a business case, right? A business case is a document or an exercise that lets the organization know if this is a project that we should spend time, resources, and money. So once a business case is approved for a particular project and it's done at the leadership level, so lots of you guys never even get to see or understand how the business case is done, because it's usually done at the senior leadership or management level. Once the business case is completed and we have the approval to move forward, this is when we create a project charter. A project charter is seen in the waterfall and the Agile environment to identify high-level scope, high-level functionality of, or the goal and objective of the project, as well as high-level timelines and high-level budget. And the responsibility of whose responsibility is it to create the project charter? Usually a product owner or a Scrum Master. After that, we start to have use case diagrams in order to help us understand how the functionality is going to interact with the various systems. Generally, a product owner or Scrum Master is responsible for that. We also have a schedule that we create for our Agile projects. Now, some people may think that you have sprints and therefore your schedule is open-ended. Generally, for projects, we generally do have a timeline and a project plan to make sure that we're completing the key core functionality within a given time frame, right? And the responsible parties for the project schedule usually is a product owner or a Scrum Master. And then we start to gather or document high-level user stories. High-level user stories can be done by a product owner or stakeholders. Detailed user stories and acceptance criteria generally are done by a product owner or a Scrum Master. Lots of you guys may have read in textbooks or other online materials that the user stories are the responsibility of a product owner to create. That necessarily is not true. All organizations work a little differently. And in my case and in my experience, Scrum Masters take the lead in writing user stories with the support of a product owner, because generally our product owners have a lot more responsibility than the type, just implementing this product. They generally have responsibilities in terms of making it successful for marketing purposes, for updating the entire organization and becoming aligned. So generally we see that our product owners are super busy with other activities in addition to the product that we're building, and therefore usually Scrum Masters step in and help in writing user stories. So now that we have detailed user stories and acceptance criteria, then we go through and create prototypes, which is somebody is done by our UI UX team members. Then we have test scripts, which are done by our QA analysts. And when we have defects, it's the role of dev to help us identify and fix them. And then we also have something called release notes that our dev teams are responsible for. So you can see from here, while our documentation workload is not as much as waterfall, there still is documentation that we see in the Agile environment, depending on what phase you may be in. So again, the overall flow of this follows what we see in the Agile environment, which is pretty incremental and iterative, which means that it goes into smaller cycles, right? So as I mentioned a little bit before, you have a product backlog, then you have detailed user stories and acceptance criteria, then you create prototypes. Those things are then added to the sprint when they're ready. We have development, our programmers develop develop from our user stories. We do testing, and then the process continues over and over again until we have accomplished or implemented all of our key or high priority functionalities and features. Okay, let me know if you found this helpful. Let me know if you have questions, and also let me know if you're watching me live or if you caught this on a replay. And then, as always, please let me know if there are any more questions that you have for me. I will provide a link to this documentation or to this diagram in the links, so that you have something to go back and reference at a later point. Okay, so I'll pause there for a minute or so to see if there's any questions that are coming through. And if you're watching this at a replay and have any questions for me, please let me know in the comments, and I will go back, review comments, and try to do the best I can in answering your questions. All right. All right. I don't see any questions at the moment. This will be it for today. As I said, I'm a little under the weather, so I apologize for the delay in the training. Next week, I'll be covering project management in the state and local government. Be sure to watch me live and come prepared with any questions you may have. Okay. All right. I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks and bye.